Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here. We're gonna be doing something a little bit different today. I saw this article, the 50 most important watches ever. Most iconic watches ever. That is a topic that I think is debated by many enthusiasts. So I wanted to look at this article and basically react with all of you. See if I agree, see if I disagree. That's really what we're gonna be doing in this video. This is from Esquire. So they had a bunch of writers come together and pitch in what they thought were the most iconic watches of all time. We're gonna see if I agree with them, disagree, and please do leave comments down below if you find their picks to be off or if you agree with them. So if you are a fan of Grand Seiko, we are going to be having an event that you are not going to want to miss. This is an exclusive limited capacity event in late June, and we'll have more details in the description down below where you can fill out a form if you are interested. In terms of programming at this event, we are going to have a watchmaker come from Japan from the Shizukuishi studio to do live assembly of one of their 9S calibers. In addition, we'll have Joe Kirk from the brand doing presentations about all things Grand Seiko. We'll have access to the new models recently unveiled for 2024. Access in the building will also be some of the rarest watches that you would have the opportunity to be able to see in person, perhaps nowhere else in the world. We'll also have one of the largest selections of Grand Seiko inventory in the country to shop, and we'll have some great food and some great drinks to go along with it. So if you want more details, one of my team members will be in touch after you fill out the form down below. This is a limited capacity event, so please do act fast. All right, let's kick it off. First one here is the Patek Philippe Calatrava reference 96. I have no problem with this. This has informed many dress watches to follow, probably lost in the mix compared to what we've seen from Patek Philippe in more recent years. And I think this is one of those watches that's very emblematic of the brand as well as just being emblematic for dress watches in general. So agree with this one. Okay, next up, all right. Ingersoll Mickey Mouse watch. Now, I might be having this reaction partially because this is the second watch they decided to put on this list. I think they know what they're doing at Esquire. They're probably trying to stir up some conversations. So it looks like they're cartoon watches for adults. It'll never catch on. They want to make this a point about, okay, this was so funky, so out there, which I understand that point. All of that considered. Now, it's hard to think about all the different icons that I know that should be included in a list like this. So to see this as number 2, I don't know if I agree. I think we'll have to see if 50 becomes this bigger number and can include more things than maybe what I am thinking of. But it's hard to believe that this would make the cut as being one of the most important watches of all time. I get it, it's cool, there's history here, but I don't know if it makes the cut given what I think should be included to follow up. Now moving along, we have the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. No disagreement from me, this deserves to be on this list. Jean-Jacques Fichter, with his diving background, being the head of the brand at the time, he understood the needs of a dive watch, and I don't think dive watches would be what they are today. The design that we consider as a dive watch would not maybe look the same if it wasn't for the 50 Fathoms. Deserves to be on this list. Rolex Day-Date deserves to be on this list as well. Gold watch, President's Bracelet as well, being very iconic. The affiliation with the US presidents, Day-Date complication, one of the early watches that was incorporating a Cyclops as well. I think it absolutely deserves to be here. All right, next up we have the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak 5402. No question, I would argue this is probably top 5 most iconic watch of all time. It's in watch royalty. Also Gerald Genta, this basically cemented him forever as being a legend of watch design. Easy choice. Uh-oh, don't let Nico see this.
Can we just skip every single Hublot? Like, I mean, I don't even want to have a conversation about it. It's not worth my time.
So we have Hublot with the Big Bang, coming out in 2004. Okay, so I think what's important here is we do have to remove personal taste from whether or not something is important. When I think of importance, I think about influence and how it's able to have an effect on broader mass market appeal. And the Hublot Big Bang, as much as some people have this polarizing idea around Hublot, I mean, their watches are not necessarily for me, but they are impactful and they are important if you're looking at 21st century watchmaking. They're usually always right there in the top 10 or right outside the top 10 in sales in Swiss watches every single year. And when Jean-Claude Biver was at the helm of Hublot and then the whole LVMH watch division, you have to give him as well as the brand some credit. The Big Bang is a watch that, yes, in the 21st century, you could say is probably one of the most popular luxury watch releases, and it did have an effect on the design traits that we now associate. Yes, there's a lot of Royal Oak in the design, there's a lot of different affiliation, but it did sample with some different materials. It had a design style that I think popularized many of the trends that we saw with larger cases. We don't have to necessarily like the design of it, but it's not the hottest take to have it on this list. Next up, we have FP Journe's Tourbillon Souverain. Now this is tough for me because I love FP Journe. I have to use the same protocol though that I just mentioned with the whole Hublot Big Bang, because just because it appeals to your taste doesn't mean it necessarily has to be included on this list of importance. Independent watchmaking, it's hard to say because we're talking about a brand here that's under 1,000 pieces of production a year, in that ballpark. At the time, in 1999, FP Journe was not known as this watchmaker that so many people ultimately knew, and this didn't take the industry by storm overnight. It took time for Francois Paul to become the icon that he is as one of the greatest living watchmakers. I also might argue that the Resonance might be my pick for the watch of his that I would mostly associate, but it's tough. So this one's also kind of fringe, and that hurts me to say because I love FP Journe very, very much. Rolex Explorer, easy one. This is a blueprint for pretty much every other sports watch to follow from Rolex. I mean, look at what you saw from early Rolex Submariner models with like the 6200, and even just something like a GMT Master 2, like this black dial, this approach. This was a watch that was responsible for many of the things that we would see from Rolex in the years to come. Next is the Vianney Halter Antiqua Perpetual Calendar. So this is a watch that I struggle with as well, just given the limited production, how out there it is, but I get their approach. What they're mentioning here is making the impossible possible. So the whole approach and thought process is that this opened up many different doors for future independent watchmakers. That might be the case, but we're talking limited production. Is this one of the most iconic watches of all time? I think about mass market influence mostly when I'm thinking about the most important watches. So this one, tough, very cool looking watch. It's out there, it is ridiculous, but I struggle to think that this is one of the 50 most important watches of all time, given the scale of what I am thinking about when I think about importance. Seiko 5 Sportsmatic, yes, without the Seiko 5 line, we as collectors, probably many of us wouldn't even be collectors. This is a watch that has incredible influence, tens of millions of watches being sold over the years. Makes perfect sense why it's on this list. Okay, so we have the Omega Speedmaster. If you look at the dictionary and looked up watch, I would see the Rolex Submariner and probably the Speedmaster. Here we have a Broad Arrow CK2915, but you could include many here for the Speedmaster, but yes, deserves to be here. Okay, the Moonswatch. I mean, guys, I know it's very recent history, but it deserves to be on this list. In the last 20 years, have there been a release that has stirred up more conversation and got more people into watches than this watch and just started a dialogue? I think it's important for the industry. I also was looking at the Google Trend data recently for this, I think when I was making the video. If you go 20 years, both for the Speedmaster and Swatch, pick in a 20-year window for all Google Trends, so the amount of people searching for something for this period of time, which month had the most search traffic for the word Speedmaster as well as Swatch? Guess what it was? March 2022. My opinion, you could say what you want about this watch. I understand it's polarizing. Maybe Swatch, in terms of their rollout, making this only available at boutiques, maybe rub people the wrong way, but it is probably one of the most important watches of all time, so I think it deserves to be here. Next is the Patek Philippe Reference 1518 Perpetual Calendar Chronograph. Easy pick. I think this really set a stage for what a genre of watch could be. I think of this complication, combination, and type. It's Patek Philippe, and many people that are collectors of this genre of watches put the 1518 at the top of the Grail list. It deserves to be on here. Braun AW10. I don't agree with this one. I don't know about it. I mean, I understand Braun in terms of their importance in industrial design, but it's hard to consider this being one of the most 50 important watches of all time. Now, I know some people might argue for Braun, but 50 of the most iconic watches of all time, I struggle to think that this would edge out. Maybe it's because there's still so many watches I think they should include first before mentioning this watch that is maybe making me react a certain way, but it's hard for me to believe that this should be on this list. 50 most important watches of all time, I don't know about that one. Rolex GMT Masters. Easy, you close your eyes, you think of a GMT watch, I think of this design. You might think of some others if you're trying to be a contrarian, but let's be real, this is the epitome of a GMT watch. Cartier Santos Dumont, this needs to be on this list. It was arguably the first pilot wristwatch ever. You have cool history to go along with it. It also helped really set forth what Cartier would become in the 20th century, this icon that it is. This deserves to be on the list, no question about it. Okay, Richard Mille, the RM011 Felipe Massa. It's hard to think about Richard Mille. Same thing I've been saying with some of these smaller production independent brands. When you're looking at what Richard Mille did last year, we're talking under 6,000 watches produced, but they are number 6 in total sales in the Swiss watch industry. I think the average retail price for Richard Mille is 275,000 Swiss francs, which is crazy. So we're talking about a small segment of people that are only going to dabble in this world. So when you're thinking about influence and most importance, I think about how many people you can reach and have an effect on. Now, Richard Mille, in terms of the cultural zeitgeist that we've seen in pop culture, it has moved. It really has become an important aspect in certain circles. But is it one of the most important watches of all time? And the other thing with RMs is there one watch more than another that is emblematic of the brand and is their icon? It's a little bit harder with a brand like this compared to others. So again, this is a little bit fringe for me. I get where they're going, but those are just some of my thoughts when looking at this. Next up is the Seiko Astron. Yes, absolutely. The whole Swiss watch industry would not be what it is today, and it was decimated by this watch. This was really the reason why the whole industry had to change and went through this quartz crisis where half of the industry basically disappeared in a 10 to 15 year period and had to go through this resurgence to be where it's at today. So absolutely, it's pioneering this technology of quartz in 1969, needs to be on the list. Casio F91W also probably deserves to be on this list. How many enthusiasts have gotten into watch collecting and even to this day have purchased this watch just because, wow, it's $20. Inflation is affecting most things in life, but for some reason, these watches still remain generally the same price. So maybe these are something we need to have economists start to look into, because F91W is timeless as it is since it was released in 1989. I mean, come on. I mean, this is a watch that absolutely deserves to be here. Breitling Navitimer, easy pick. One of the most iconic pilot watches of all time. It's in that pantheon of pilot watch design, and one that you have to include on this list. Come on, easy pick. Then the Junghans Max Bill. See, this is also a watch that's very near and dear to my heart because it was one of my personal gateways into watch collecting. I always loved this design. I think you can absolutely make a case for this watch. It was a watch that helped really push forward this idea of the Bauhaus school of design and incorporating it within watchmaking. Also, this design style has informed many of our other designs that we would later see in our everyday life. So I think this one could make the cut. So I am not gonna push back on this one as much. Now, that might be me and my own personal taste. I'm trying to remove myself as much as possible from looking at this list and being objective, but I think I agree with this one. Tudor Black Bay, I think I would agree with it. It really brought back the vintage inspiration dive watch trend that is still kicking to this day. It's responsible for reviving a brand in Tudor that for the most part was dead in many parts of the world. And it also has been influential in changing much of the market and what is available to you between this $3,000 to $5,000 price range, which I would say today is still some of the best point of value. If you're talking about diminishing returns, this is a great sweet spot where you can get a phenomenal watch and still getting a luxury presentation. And the Tudor Black Bay is a watch that we have to thank for that in many ways. Omega Seamaster, the 1948, so the original. So this was celebrating the 100 years of Omega. Also was a watch that incorporated some cool different tech with some of their water resistant sealing. Also the Seamaster name, this is one of the most important names in all of watchmaking. I agree with it. I think this could be on the list for sure. I also would maybe mention a Constellation that came a few years after this for its release, being just its connection to chronometry, but we'll see if that makes the cut. But Seamaster, I will absolutely let this one slide. Next is the Harwood Automatic. So this is an interesting pick. I think I agree with this one too. Many people will contest and there are some debate on what was the first automatic wristwatch, but by many accounts, this was the first one. If we didn't have automatic watches, I mean, our industry would look a lot different. So absolutely, this is important. I think this makes sense to me. Patek Philippe with the Louis Cotier world time function. I mean, come on, yeah, this is absolutely on here. Yes, and think about where this was, 1937. Yes, you had Longines that were doing some dual time zone function a decade before this with their Zulu, but this is coming 15 years before the craze of the 1950s with many of the GMT watches that we would see, so deserves to be here. Zenith El Primero, yes, one of the first automatic chronographs and wristwatches. You have 5 hertz movement to go along with it, one of the few at the time. You also had a watch movement that was living inside the Rolex Daytona for over a decade. Easy pick. Rolex Oyster, yes, watchmaking would not be the same without this case, and if you had to look at the blueprint for pretty much every Rolex watch to come after it, Rolex Oyster, I mean, this case you'll still see on the dial of many of their watches. This was the framework where many other Rolex watches could be produced. Piaget Altiplano, I mean, I get it. You're going for the ultra thin angle, but come on, really. There's so many watches I would include before the Piaget Altiplano. I mean, it's a nice watch, no question. Piaget, relatively underrated, especially their ultra thin movements throughout the mid 20th century. But come on, I have to say this is probably not on the list. There's still more to go, but I don't think this makes the cut. Now we have the Dirty Dozen. So this is not necessarily one brand we're talking about here, but this design style. You're not gonna get any pushback from me. This changed watch design forever and also changed human history forever for the production of these watches. This changed the trajectory of the world based on having these watches on certain people's wrists. It's a very important watch, all things considered. Patek Philippe Nautilus, absolutely. You have the Genta connection again. It was one of the early pioneers of integrated steel sports watches, still in an era where this was pretty out there for watch design in the 1970s. Even in recent history, in the past 10 years, when I'm considering the poster children of the craze of collectability, secondary trading market values, I think of the Rolex Daytona and the Patek Philippe Nautilus. Those are the two watches. So both in the larger scale of history of what the Nautilus is, as well as more recent history, it deserves to be on this list. Speaking of the Daytona, yes, we don't need to say anything more. The Paul Newman Daytona, the early Daytona references set a standard for many chronographs to follow after it. I remember when the Paul Newman Daytona auction happened, and that was really the tip and the pinnacle of when we started to see this crazy resurgence for watch collecting and some of these secondary trading market values. Longines, 1333Z, or Z as they like to say. Yes, I was in their museum and I remember seeing this watch. It's incredible history that Longines has. You could probably even mention the 13ZN, which is another chronograph that they have in their archive that is very important as well. But this one probably deserves the cut because of what it meant just historically for chronographs in general. IWC Mark 11, I think so as well. The Mark series outside of the big Pilot family, this just total Pilot DNA. This is one of the pillars of the brand and still one of the best-selling models from the brand to this day. Panerai with their Luminor comes up next. I would say this one as well as the Radiomir probably both deserve to be here. Has the case silhouette, pioneer of water resistance, the crown guard design. This watch is one of the most recognizable watches in all of the industry, and you can see it from across the room. Next is the Omega Seamaster Diver 300, and yes, if we did not have this watch, Omega would not be the powerhouse that it is today. It resurrected the brand. The Speedmaster was always there as this icon and was selling well and was a watch that collectors always loved. But this was a redesign and an approach to the Seamaster with the Bond affiliation that really catapulted Omega to the heights that we now see it as in the last 30 years. You could argue that this is the most important design and release from Omega for the past few decades. And I don't think you should get that much pushback for it. It is a very important watch for Omega and for the industry more broadly about what is that entry door to luxury watches that you can get, a first proper luxury watch. This is on a short list for so many people to this day. Okay, next we have MB&F with the horological machine for the Thunderbolt. Here's the thing with this. I love Max Buser. I think Max Buser is the most impressive person I've ever had the opportunity to have a discussion with in this entire industry, or at least near the top. He's an incredible, incredible mind in this industry, and I think we are very, very blessed to have him in the industry because he could be doing a lot of other crazy things if he decided that he would be interested in something else. I think the guy could be in Silicon Valley and doing something incredible there. But it's hard for me to think about one horological machine that defines it all for him, and I think understanding him, he gets bored very easily. He's always looking for the next thing, and because he never settles on one thing forever, that almost defeats this purpose of importance as a single body of work. Max needs to be judged as this entire body of work, as the person, as the creator, rather than one of the creations merely. And that's the magic of Max. So that's why I don't know if I would put one watch of his on the list of the most important watches. Love Max, but I don't know if I'd pick one of them to be on a list like this. Next we have Swatch. This industry would be dead. The Swiss watch industry would be dead if it was not for the Swatch. This resurrected the entire industry, probably a top 5 most important watch of all time. And yes, it comes with this plastic case. Yes, it comes with the cheap quartz movement on the inside, but that does not take away from its impact and importance. It created one of the largest groups and conglomerates in luxury watchmaking as well with the Swatch group. Can't be overstated. Swatch, yes, yes, yes. Tag Heuer Carrera as well. I'd put this probably in the top 3 to 5 most important chronographs of all time. Jack Heuer probably being one of the most important leaders, brand leaders of the 20th century of any Swiss watch brand. Yes, easy pick on this. Rolex Submariner. Not going to say anything else. Yes. Ulysse Nardin with the Freak. This deserves to be on this list. I don't want to hear anything about it. This watch is one of the most important watches of all time for a variety of reasons. I think about independent watchmaking and watchmaking. Where did things start to get crazier? When did independent people start to really push things forward, and when watchmaking could be questioned to be more than what it was before? This 2001 era was important, and the Freak was right there. You look at Harry Winston with the Opus series. I just mentioned Max Busser. That was incredibly impactful on this idea. But the Freak, both on how a watch could demonstrate and showcase the time, revolutionary. Also, what I'll mention too is, would the adoption of silicon as a material be as popular without this watch? This was the first truly high-end bespoke type of watch to feature the material and popularize it. So for a variety of reasons, agree with this. Ulysse Nardin. The Apple Watch, we can say what we want. I know many mechanical watch fans, including myself here, but the Apple Watch, it changed the industry forever. Ever since the Apple Watch came out, Swiss watch exports have gone down every single year, mostly as a byproduct of quartz watches, affordable quartz watches, but last year was the exception, and the exception of that was only because of the Moonswatch and it having this crazy sales numbers that you actually saw year over year. The first time since 2014, 2015, since the Apple Watch was released, Swiss watch exports actually go up compared to down, but a big reason for that is because the Apple Watch is dominating with market share. Franck Muller with the Giga Tourbillon. Franck Muller, very cool brand, very cool watchmaker. I think probably underrated, generally speaking, given just the change the brand has undergone in the last 10 years, but they do make some pretty out there and impressive watches. I just struggle to think that this is one of the 50 most important watches of all time. And I would even argue that, is this even the Franck Muller watch that you put as the most important? I struggle with this one. We have JLC with the Reverso. I mean, yes, easy for its case, for what it's represented for watchmaking in general, Art Deco design, and JLC just as a manufacturer. Many of the watches that we've seen on this list so far would not exist without JLC with their movements powering them. Audemars Piguet with the Royal Oak Offshore. We have to fix the image here on this one, Esquire, so just make sure we fix it. I don't have much issue though with having the Royal Oak Offshore on here. It was a watch that was very important in the 1990s and the early 2000s of changing many of the trends. I mean, people were thinking at the time when the Royal Oak came out that, oh, nobody would want this, a steel luxury sports watch in an era where a lot of these high horology brands were making very bespoke, small little gold pieces. The same thing could be said about the Offshore. It was huge at the time, but it did land, and I think it was one of the most important products from AP in the last 30 years. Next, we have IWC with the Flieger design. I mean, this is the design that many brands can call their own, but yes, I would agree with this as well. This is a impactful design style that we see influence and trickling into many other designs to follow years to come. Next, we have Blancpain with the 1735 Grand Complication. I was visiting Blancpain. They had all of the different layout of the components that were used inside of this watch. Definitely impressive. This is French for me, but I see where they're going from here. This was a time when this came out that it was almost a return to showing that horology had a place. It wasn't about just quartz watchmaking anymore, so this was this idea to have an answer back to this dark period for Swiss watches. So see where they're coming from. This is on the fringe though. We're getting close to the end here, so I'm just thinking about some of the watches that I would include, and I have not seen them yet, so just keep going. Tag Heuer Monaco, yes. Racing inspiration, one of the most important chronographs from one of the icons of chronograph design in Heuer. Also have a square case, the Steve McQueen connection. It has everything you need to be on this list. IWC with the Portugieser, I could make the argument. I could also make the argument that you could see an Ingenieur on this list, and I have not seen it yet. So of all IWC's watches, does this deserve the cut? I mean, Portugieser, I think it could deserve a place on here, but there's probably some other IWCs and some other watches that I also could include, but this one, possibly and probably makes the cut too. Yep. Bulgari with the Octo Finissimo. I can understand why they're making this claim. I think the Octo Finissimo is one of the more just novel design concepts in the past decade that we've seen in watchmaking. But how will history look back at this watch design? I think it's a little bit early to tell. So I struggle to also include this on the 50 most important watches of all time. No doubt a cool watch, no doubt different, no doubt providing something pretty unique, but is it one of the 50 most important watches of all time? I'm less certain about that. And the final watch here is the Cartier Tank. I don't know why we waited this long to mention the Cartier Tank, but it has everything you need to be seen as an important watch. The design style in a variety of ways with its case, Roman numerals, its connection to pop culture, being worn by very important individuals over the years. It changed the game for Cartier and elevating to the brand that it now is today. No question, probably in the top 5 to 10 most important watches of all time. But all right, that is it. So those are the 50 watches. Now, I'm just paused here for a moment because I wanted to think about watches as I was going through this. So I took a quick second and thought about watches that they did not include that I thought probably should have been included. So one, I mean, this was the most glaring mistake. They do not have a Casio G-Shock on this list, which, I mean, if this was a YouTube video, you'd be crucified, guys. I'm just letting you know at Esquire, you gotta be thinking out for the comments. I'm bringing the YouTube heat here, so there are gonna be people that are gonna be calling you out for this now. But you need to have a G-Shock on this list. It's probably the best-selling watch of all time and has been worn by so many people. If you do not include the Casio G-Shock on the 50 most important watches of all time, bad job out of Esquire for that. A couple other things, Seiko, no 62 Mas, no SKX, no Seiko Turtle. I think you could include another Seiko watch on this list without question. I think Grand Seiko Snowflake can absolutely be on this list, both with what it meant for high-end Japanese watchmaking, what it meant for pioneering this new technology of the spring drive. I think you can give that an honorable shake. Breitling with the Super Ocean that was not on this list. Breguet with the Type 20, I thought that was probably an interesting omission as well. You could probably put a Breguet on here, potentially. The Omega Constellation, as I mentioned, I think you could also include that. IWC Ingenieur, Casiotron, Patek Philippe Aquanaut, I mean, I think you could include that too. I mean, there's some watches on here that were a little bit questionable, but the Aquanaut not being on a list like this. We also didn't have a Rolex Datejust. I mean, that to me is probably one of the most important Rolex watch designs of all time. The Pulsar was not here. We had the Glycine Airman, that was another one that really sprung to mind. Also, there's no love for Lange. I think you could argue that Lange 1 or the Datograph both represent this rebirth of German watchmaking as it approached the 21st century in the 1990s and reviving one of the great towns and centers for watchmaking in the world in Glashütte. So overall, I would give this list, you know, generally they hit a lot of them, but I think what happened was it seemed like there was a lot of people in the room that were picking, you know, obscure independent brands rather than thinking of like the sure watches that should be included. Like, I mean, the fact that a G-Shock's not on here, guys, come on. Like, let's be real about this. And I'm probably forgetting some other watches because I'm just pausing and I'm just going through this and trying to think of things that spring to mind immediately. But it seems like some of the affordable watches are not included, as well as some other watches from brands that I would have thought would have made the cut. What would you give a grade for the Esquire list out of a scale of F to A? I mean, I think they did pretty well, but there are some misses here that I know if I made a YouTube video about the most iconic watches of all time and I didn't include some of these on here, I know you guys would be coming at me. So leave some comments down below. Love to get a discussion going on down there. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments down below as well and give it a thumbs up. Really do appreciate that. Also do subscribe if you do enjoy the channel so you can stay up to date with future content. Definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of over 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.